Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to my podcast, Hands Down, again, where the hands might be off, but the microphone is certainly turned on. I'm your host again, Javid Nordell, and in today's episode, we are going to be discussing kind of the rest of the NBA trade deadline. In last week's episode, we had saw the blockbuster trade of Luka Doncic getting traded to the LA Lakers, Anthony Davis going to Dallas, De'Aaron Fox going to San Antonio. The rest of the NBA trade deadline has been complete. We did indeed see Jimmy Butler get moved. You guys will hear about that a little bit later in the video. And then we also had the Super Bowl. The Eagles overcame the Chiefs and they played a rather complete game, and the Chiefs almost didn't show up to play football. So we're kind of going to just do my recap and opinions on that game. But with that being said, I don't want to waste any more of your guys' time, so let's jump into the NBA trade deadline. I almost don't even know where to start. This trade deadline was absolutely badonker-donkers, as I like to say. It will go down in history as arguably one of the most entertaining weeks in basketball, arguably one of the most insane trade deadlines in all of sports. The one that I would maybe put it up with is in baseball, when we saw Max Scherzer and Trey Turner get traded to the Dodgers. But quite frankly, in baseball, with the way that contracts work and longevity and everything, it's kind of weird that you see a lot of star players getting moved more frequently than not. We saw Luis Ariz get traded twice, and he's been an all-star both years that he was traded. So that was rather interesting, going from the Twins to the Marlins, and then the Marlins to the Padres, and now he's on the trade block again. Baseball is just an interesting sport in that way. So this trade deadline, though, will go down in NBA as the greatest trade deadline in all of basketball, and like I said, are up there for all of sports, and it will go down as one of the greatest weeks in all of basketball. The player movement, I am absolutely here for. We saw close to a third of the league get moved, which is just insane to think. And we all saw teams try to do something to either get competitive to win now in this stacked Western Conference, or be up there as one of the four teams to maybe be in the East. Or we saw teams, okay, we're rebuilding, let's continue our rebuild. And then we saw teams do, I couldn't even tell you what they were doing. It was that type of trade deadline. We had a little bit of everything. In today's episode, I will be discussing the winners of the trade deadline, the losers of the trade deadline, and a couple of teams of kind of what the fuck are we doing? I like the moves, but I just don't understand them. But hey, I'm no GM, I'm no Nico Harrison, so time will only tell on those. But those rather questionable moves weren't bad. It's just, in my eyes, it didn't fit the timeline of said teams. But we'll get into that a little bit later. As you can see on my screen here to my right or left, depending on what side it is for you guys, you can see a bunch of names with a team name. Sorry, my brain blanked for a second there. With a team name to the next one. That is a list of everybody who got traded and the team they ended up on. Not going to go ahead and read all of them for you guys. If you want to go ahead, stop the video, you can and read them all. But a couple of the names included De'Aaron Fox, Luka Doncic, PJ Tucker got passed around like a blunt, as did Dennis Schroeder. Both got traded a couple times. PJ Tucker got traded 3 times in 5 days, maybe even more and less or something like that. Then Dennis Schroeder got also traded 3 times in a day. They literally got passed around like a blunt, kind of crazy. See other names like Anthony Davis, obviously on there, Jimmy Butler, Andrew Wiggins, bunch of kind of big names. The Jimmy Butler was the name that we was expecting, but I don't think we was expecting 61 other names to come on there. And in total, since the post-February, this is a 6-day span. 4, 6. A 6-day span. We saw 63 players. If we want to be technical, it's actually 61 because there was a trade that was rescinded. We will talk about that later. But 63 players moved in a 5 to 6 day span. is crazy. And that's, like I said, that's not even including the Dennis Schroeder trade previously when he got traded from Brooklyn to Golden State. That's not including the Nick Richards trade when he got traded to Phoenix. This is including everything post February 1st. We saw 63 players in total moved. We saw 38 second-round picks either exchanged, swapped, or traded. We saw 13 first-round picks on the move. And then 7 of those deals included cash considerations. Just an overall crazy trade deadline. I am just bamboozled by everything here. What a great trade deadline. As a fan of the sport, as an NBA fan, it's hard to see the player movement, specifically maybe a Dennis Schroeder, PJ Tucker type, because you moved so much. But hopefully you didn't necessarily kind of actually do that move in between those days, specifically if you're PJ Tucker, because homeboy PJ Tucker has 50,000 pairs of shoes. Yes, you heard me right, 50,000 pairs of shoes. Fact check me. And he would have had to got those moved a couple of times. So hopefully he just left those maybe in storage or his one place and now only has to move them to Toronto instead of moving them to Utah, Miami, then Toronto. But it's just absolutely wild. This trade deadline, like I said prior, will go down in history as the greatest trade deadline in all of basketball and potentially in all of sports. One name I'm a little shocked that I didn't see. Well, 2 names I'm shocked that I didn't see on here, and I will go into one of them furthermore, is Brooklyn Nets and Cam Johnson, but I'll get into that a little bit later. The next one is Kevin Durant, and the reason I say Kevin Durant is because Golden State was essentially not willing to pay Jimmy Butler, and so they got off the sweepstakes for Jimmy Butler, but then they aggressively pursued Kevin Durant, but Kevin Durant wasn't really wanting a reunion with Golden State, mainly because of his relationship that he has with Draymond Green. I mean, essentially they've squashed the beef, but is it really squashed? Probably not. And granted, Bob Myers was the GM at the time. It's Mike Dunleavy, I believe, is in charge over there now, so different ownership, but KD wasn't really feeling a reunion. However, KD also, he knows it's a business. I mean, we saw Luka Doncic get traded. We know it's a business at the end of the day, but he kind of came out without saying he felt blindsided by the Phoenix Suns because the Suns weren't wanting to trade not Luka Doncic. He did get traded, Devin Booker. And then they kind of really moved Bradley Beal's contract. He's an expendable piece, but he's making 50 M's. And when you have a guy making 50 M's producing what Bradley Beal is producing, can't really trade that or get capital out of that. So then they kind of swung for the fences and said, okay, well, what if we trade Kevin Durant? And I mean, from a business point, it makes sense. The Suns are ninth in the conference right now. They're 24-23 at the time I'm recording this. They're not really being that competitive team that they're supposed to be. Obviously, their big 3 of Booker, Durant, and Beal isn't working. So yeah, maybe it's time to blow it up, but talk with your, I mean, we saw Luka get moved without any communication to him, but I just feel like Durant is an individual who, I understand it's a business at the end of the day, but he is someone who has deserved that respect as a player to at least know what's kind of going on in his future. He all but said a couple of years ago that he wanted to be traded out of Brooklyn and come play with Phoenix. So doesn't Phoenix owe it to him to try their best, or at least communicate with him? And maybe if they're trying their best, communicate with Durant that, okay, our best chances of winning is going to be to move you, not necessarily just blindside him. Because we had Dallas call, which that would have been an interesting pairing if Dallas got rid of that. Then you pair up AD, Kyrie, and Kevin Durant. Talk about a big 3. And we've already seen Kevin Durant and Kyrie. I just combined Kyrie and Kevin Durant twice. We've already seen Kyrie and KD play together. And then we heard, obviously, Golden State called them. That didn't really go anywhere. We saw that Houston called him, which I thought was a little interesting because Houston didn't want to call and make any moves for Jimmy Butler, but yet they called and made a move for Kevin Durant, which, I mean, I guess that makes sense. Kevin Durant is Kevin Durant, so you make that move 10 times out of 10, maybe 9 times out of 10. The one the last minute call I saw, which it would have been really cool, fascinating, is the T-Wolves called. Because Ant has always looked up to Kevin Durant. So that would have kind of been cool. He obviously got to play with him in the Olympics. If he could have kind of played with him towards the end of his career, that would have been cool for Ant. But it makes me wonder, Durant's got to be out of Phoenix come summertime. So I'm curious to see how Phoenix ends this year, and then I'm curious to see what Kevin Durant does in the offseason because of that, because we had so much trade speculation around him without that communication. Like I said, an absolute wild NBA deadline, but before we get too lost into me going on to a further yap session, let's get into my winners of the NBA trade deadline. Take this with great salt. However, I will say we have had breaking news. This trade for Mark Williams and Dalton Knecht has actually been rescinded. So that trade did not go through. Actually, as of yesterday, when I'm recording this is February 9th, as of February 8th is when that trade actually got rescinded. So I would still have the Lakers as a winner here, and I don't have this in no chronological order. It's just these are the 4 best teams, I think. If I had to put it in that way, I would go Cleveland, San Antonio, Golden State, OKC. Now that I know that they don't, even though OKC didn't really make trades, I'll explain that in a second. But LA is kind of the 4th team I'd put on here. Obviously, when you make a trade for a mega superstar like you do Luka Doncic, you won the trade and you didn't give up the capital that they did not give up. You win the trade. There's no if, whats, or buts about it. The biggest things you can do now is you hope that Luka resigns with your team and that he becomes the face of your franchise, which I don't see a world where Luka doesn't, especially now that he gets to play with Bron, that he gets to see how Bron conditions himself, and that LA is that's the market for NBA. Between LA, Dallas, and New York, those are the 3 to 4 markets that you would want to play in, or maybe potentially Miami is that 4th one, but those are the 3 markets you would want to play in. And now you go to LA to become a face of the franchise, to become the next face of the league, essentially. And you get to, like I said, learn from LeBron James. So I like this from the Lakers standpoint, but considering that this trade for Mark Williams has been rescinded, they still don't have a big now, and that was my biggest concern, and I discussed that in my episode 1 last week, that you need to go out and you need to get a big. And they did. Technically, they went out and got Mark Williams, and I like that a lot. That lineup was about to look nasty. You was going to have Luka at the 1, AR at the 2, Bron at the 3, DFS at the 4, or you run Hachimura at the 3, Bron at the 4, however JJ really wants to do that, and then you put Marky Mark at the 5. That sounds like a great starting 5. That sounds like a championship caliber team starting 5. That sounds like a team that was going to give OKC, Boston, Cleveland a run for their money. But now you don't. Now it hasn't happened, and if you're Dalton Knecht, you gotta feel a little bit weird, because this was 2 whole days after this trade had happened that it had been rescinded. So homeboy had definitely packed up his locker, and I don't know, he probably hasn't went to Charlotte yet, but he definitely packed up his locker, said his goodbyes to all his LA friends, said his goodbyes to his LA teammates, and now he has to come back into a locker room that, granted, he was probably liked in that locker room. I do like that Dalton Knecht is coming back to the Lakers. I think JJ Redick is the best coach that Dalton Knecht can have as a shooter, and someone who can hopefully only get better as a shooter. But Rob Pelinka also just traded you. So now you're going back into a locker room that you were essentially unwanted, moreover by the organization, not necessarily the players. So maybe it's a little bit better for Dalton Knecht in this sense. Also, if you're Mark Williams, you're in that exact same boat, because if you look on X, formerly known as Twitter, the Hornets organization came out with this really petty ass tweet that said, "We are super excited to have Mark Williams back. Some other teams have aggressively pursued him," and it was something blah blah blah. And then, "We're glad to have Mark Williams back. He strengthens our team." If he strengthens your team so much, why the fuck did you trade him in the first place? So I think it's a petty ass tweet. It just, I mean, it's a PR It just didn't make sense to me. But if you're Mark Williams and Dalton Knecht, you got to be a little awkward going back into those locker rooms. But it doesn't hurt either team too much because the Hornets are still rebuilding. And Mark Williams, like I said, he's 23 years old. The reason the trade was rescinded because he felt his physical. He's had back problems with Charlotte that they knew about. My question is maybe and they knew about it. Maybe they had more concerns, and that's why they were so quick to try to trade him. And then obviously that is why you run physicals, because you don't want to trade for something that you don't know about. In my TikTok, I mentioned the Karis LeVert. When he got traded for James Harden, he found out about the cancer he essentially had and was able to get that fixed. It's just interesting because if you're the Hornets, it doesn't really affect you because Mark Williams is still 23 years young. You still have a good center to be on your roster. You just hope his health and his safety can be the next best thing for you. And then you go into whatever your future rebuild is. If you're the Lakers, though, you get your young player in Dalton Knecht back, but the trade deadline has already came and gone now, and you don't have a center. You have Jackson Hayes, but I don't trust Jackson Hayes blocking to be your rim protector. I don't trust Jackson Hayes to be a starting center on a championship caliber team, as mentioned before. And with the trade deadline passed now, your best bet is the buyout market. And what center is going to be available in the buyout market? Is that center going to be much better than Jackson Hayes? Probably not. So the Lakers championship window is obviously opened for the future, but shrinking for this year. And it's going to be interesting. The Spurs were an obvious winner here. They traded for De'Aaron Fox. De'Aaron Fox all but said he wanted to play with the Spurs. I talked about this on my episode last week. Don't want to get too much into it, and he's looked amazing in his first couple of games with the Spurs. So no complaints here. And like I said, the fact that you didn't have to give up Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, a pick, like a valuable pick. You gave up 2 future picks that are you're going to be competitive by that time. Then you gave up Charlotte's lottery protected pick, and Charlotte's obviously going to be in the lottery. The big thing is, and De'Aaron Fox came out and said this, is he didn't want Stephon Castle to be a part of the trade. He said he wanted to come play with Stephon Castle as well. And I kind of think that's a diss to the Kings organization, because you all but asked to be out of Sacramento, and then you affected the trade package that you get. It's almost tampering. It's lingering with tampering. I can see why it's not tampering, but I also could make a case for that to be tampering because San Antonio got to keep Stephon Castle at the end of the day. And I mean, that pairing of Stephon Castle, who still gets to learn behind Chris Paul, and then now he gets to learn from De'Aaron Fox, and then you have Chris Paul, who gets to teach Stephon Castle more, who gets to continue to mentor Victor, and now he gets to come in and not just back up, but teach De'Aaron Fox. It's amazing. And like I said, you didn't give up any young capital. You already knew this player was going to play for you. Absolute dub. The Cleveland if you guys watch my TikToks, you would know English is my second language. Actually, as stupid as my first language. I'm working on it. I'll eventually get there. Okay, kidding. But the Cavaliers, I think, and it was a small trade, but this was one of my most favorite trades of the entire deadline, because the Cavaliers were kind of just missing that one piece. Bench depth is important for the regular season, but they've already proved that they've been a good regular season team. What you need to do now is you need to establish your identity, and you need to show that you can perform in the playoffs and that you can go up against Boston in a 7-game series. And what better way to do that than go and make your starting 5 the most complete starting 5 in all of basketball? I would say it's better than Boston's. Depending on how OKC runs theirs, I would say it's almost better than OKC. If OKC runs 2 bigs, I wouldn't quite say so. But if OKC continues to run J-Dub at the 4, then yeah, you have an edge at the 3. Your starting lineup is going to be Darius Garland. It's going to be Donovan Mitchell. It's going to be DeAndre Hunter, which guess what? You don't need DeAndre Hunter to be putting up 15 to 20 points a game for you. You need him to put up a solid 10 maybe a night, and then to guard the offensive player on the other team. And that's what he's going to do. And it's going to be absolutely amazing. And then obviously you have your bigs, and you go Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. What team is beating the Cavaliers in a 7-game series? I don't see a world where that's happening. Okay, I do. I see one world where that's happening, and that's OKC. And I guess I could do a little teaser on, as of right now, February 9th, 2025, it is the Cavs and the Thunder. Those are the two teams to beat. Those should be the two teams in the finals. So I guess we will have to see if it happens in April. I told you so. If not, you guys can clip this and laugh at me all you want. But that's too much for us to figure out. But I really like this trade. And the Cavs didn't give up much. They gave up Georges Niang. They gave up like 3-5 second round picks and one other bench player. But like I said, the bench depth is important, I think, through the regular season, and you can make an argument that it's important through the postseason. But you want to play your starters, you want to play your stars the most through the postseason, and that's what Cleveland was lacking. They was lacking wing depth, and they was lacking the consistent three. And now they have that, and they still have decent depth on the bench. So I'm A-okay with it. And then Golden State I have on here as a last hoorah, essentially. Steph Curry is the greatest point guard of all time and is obviously the greatest shooter of all time. And we have seen him try to put the Warriors on his back this year, and he's played well, but he's not been the Steph Curry we know him to be. He's been averaging 23 a game, and that's just not the Steph Curry we know. We like, yes, it's cool when you can carry a team, but he doesn't have that Klay Thompson this year. Draymond's been off and on battling with injury, so he's not really had it. He's had to play hero ball, and he's at that age, he's 36, 37, where he can't really play hero ball. He needs someone else to help him. But if you're the Golden State Warriors and you have the greatest point guard of all time and you have one of the greatest coaches of all time in Steve Kerr and Steph Curry, you go be competitive while you have those guys on your roster. You don't just say, oh, we're gonna settle for the bare minimum, kind of, we're gonna just stay afloat. No, you go be competitive. I understand the West is wild. It's the wild, wild West, as we like to say. But you give the greatest point guard of all time the best chance he has to win. And that best chance was to go get him another co-star. Obviously there was the rumors about Kevin Durant. He wasn't really wanting that reunion, and we've kind of already saw that, so I don't know how that would have been, especially just since it's more of aging and not a different type of person. Like, for instance, if KD and Kyrie were to reunite, it would be a different big three. It wouldn't be James Harden, it'd be Anthony Davis, which you have a point guard, so you got a guard, a wing, and a big. It's a great big three to have. But in this sense, the Warriors needed to get just another two, because Jonathan Kuminga obviously wasn't being that two. Andrew Wiggins should be a three on a team, a third option. He can be a second option, but I wouldn't trust him in the playoffs to be that second option. And he's been stepping it up, don't get me wrong, but you needed to go make a move. And then you paid Jimmy Butler. You already gave him, I believe it was a 2-year, $121 million extension, and that perfectly fits the timeline that you have for Draymond, for Steph, and now for Jimmy Butler to go make one last hoorah. Are they going to be competitive enough to beat a Denver, an LA, OKC, heck, maybe even a Memphis? I don't know, but at least now you're competitive enough, and it's not just Steph who's going to be doing everything. It's not just the help that, like, because you didn't trade pods for marketing and all this stuff, and now you went and got a guy. So Steph has another co-star. I like this because of the timeline for the Warriors. They have the experience, playoff Jimmy Butler, and I mean, like I said, I'm recording this February 9th. I've already seen their first game. They made a 30-point swing. They was down by 20, and then they came up and they beat the Bulls by 10. And Steph went off. He had a game. He was the Steph Curry I remember he was. He was the Steph Curry I enjoy watching. And Jimmy Butler was okay being the second option. Jimmy Butler passed the ball to Steph Curry. Jimmy Butler had a decent game too. And if we get that Jimmy Butler, the playoff Jimmy Butler, and Steph Curry, this team can make a serious run. As for how far they'll go, I guess it only will say, but that experience that those two bring, the sky's the limit if for Steph's last hoorah. So an honorable mention I would put as the winners here is the Oklahoma City Thunder. And the reason I didn't necessarily put them in here is because they didn't really make a trade. The only trade they did was to get Daniel Tice, which is going to help their big depth, which they definitely needed, because they have Chet's missed a bunch of games. They have Ihart's missed games. Chet and Ihart haven't really played together. And outside of that, you don't have bigs. You've been playing J-Dub at the 4, at the other J-Dub at the 5. Like, that's a very small lineup. I am curious now, as of today, as of yesterday, Chet is back now, and the Thunder is like 23-4, 23-5 with Art in the lineup, and then they was really good, obviously, when Chet was in the lineup. I'm curious to see if they're going to run a double big. Are they going to go a Shea, a Caruso, or a Case and Wallace, and then put Jade up at the 3, and then go 2 bigs, or are they going to have one of them come off the bench, obviously being Isaiah Hartenstein? It'll be very interesting to see that, but they didn't necessarily make enough trades to do anything, but with getting Chet back, it's almost like a trade. But those would be my winners for the NBA trade deadline. The losers I have as the Dallas Mavericks. Obviously, we discussed this last week in my episode. You traded your franchise megastar because you think defense wins championship games. I've done a little bit more research on it. The conditioning, the defense wins championship games. Nico Harrison came out and said his championship window is the next 4 years. He could really care less about what happens in the next 10 years because, heck, he might even not be there. Heck, Jason Kidd might not even be there. As a fan, just an NBA fan, and if I was a Dallas Maverick fan, I would be concerned that my GM is saying that because he's not really caring about our future. He's caring, like, you should care about the now and the future. Obviously, you want to do what's best to make you win now and be competitive for years to come. And you had a player on your roster who could do that. The one thing I will say, outside of the conditioning that makes sense, is because of the whole collective bargain agreement that the NBA has and the second apron that we have, I think Dallas, well, it's also because Mark Cuban isn't fully owning the team anymore, but I think Dallas was afraid that they didn't want to pay and be over the tax threshold and be over the second apron limit and pay a man $346 million when he's such a defensive liability. It's absolutely crazy to think, considering that man was Luka Doncic, but if we're considering the CBA, I guess it makes sense. I was listening to Draymond Green's podcast the other day, and Draymond Green came out and said, kind of expect more of this. Like, this is only the beginning, essentially. We might be seeing a lot more of bigger names getting traded because teams are trying to stay under that second apron. And Draymond Green said it himself, he hates the second apron. He thinks it's the dumbest shit ever out there. And I, quite frankly, full-heartedly agree with Draymond Green. I know that's something crazy to do. I usually don't agree with Draymond Green. But in this sense, I do agree with him in this sense. The second apron is the stupidest shit ever. And it is only going to continue, like he said, to see these great players, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, LaMelo Ball, as we go on in the future, Cade Cunningham, who knows, who are the face of the franchise for their teams, get moved because we don't want to pay them the money that you could argue if they're not worth, but because your franchise, and I get it, it's a lot of money to put towards one player in your franchise, but when it's Luka Doncic who put up the counting stats that he did, that's just still, in my opinion, something you do. The second team I have here was the Chicago Bulls. I was a little disappointed in the Bulls with them extending. I like Lonzo Ball, don't get me wrong, but I'm confused by their timeline here because I don't see them winning in the next 2 years. And you extend Lonzo Ball for the next 2 years, you trade Zach LaVine away for a pick, and then you kept Nikola Vucevic because you think you can get more value out of him in the summer. I think the most value you could have got for him was this trade deadline. I think you genuinely could have got a first round pick for him. And I don't know, maybe teams weren't offering those first round picks. Maybe they was offering 5 second round picks. Maybe he was asking 2 first round picks. I find it crazy that you don't trade, because Vucevic and LaVine have been in trade rumors for the past 2 years. LaVine hasn't been able to be moved because of injury luck and then his contract. You finally are able to move him and get a pick out of it. Vucevic's contract isn't the worst, but you're obviously not in a win now mode. You should be rebuilding, but yet you're keeping someone who is keeping your team afloat, and then you say you're fighting for a play-in spot. I thought you was rebuilding though, so I don't like what Chicago did here, just because I feel like you should have just fully embraced in the rebuilding, get rid of Zach, get rid of Bruce, and then I'm okay with extending Lonzo. I would have traded Lonzo personally because of the capital you could have got out of him, and then try to be competitive 2-3 years for now. But now, as a Lonzo Ball fan, I'm only a Lonzo, LaMelo, and LiAngelo Ball fan. I'm not a LeVar Ball fan. I might swerve in that corner. Okay, I'm sorry. But as a fan of the Ball brothers, I just hate to see Lonzo be on a team that's so inconsistent and not competitive. I would have loved to see Lonzo go play for a playoff competitive team and help that team in a way. The way Lonzo Ball plays basketball is he does a little bit of everything. His passing is amazing. His jump shot's gone better. His 3 points are actually falling down. His IQ for the game is amazing. I would have loved to see that on a championship competitor team. But I don't hate it for the Bulls. Obviously, Lonzo Ball is such a great player and you don't want to get rid of that, but to me, it doesn't fit their timeline. The Hawks, I was similarly very confused on. Jalen Johnson's been having an amazing year. He goes down with an injury. He's going to be out for the rest of the year. And they went out and they traded DeAndre Hunter, which was essentially his replacement, and then you got bench depth kind of essentially in return. To my understanding, you don't own your pick this year because it's San Antonio's, if I'm not mistaken. And you're staying afloat right now, but Trae Young can't do everything by himself. And I just find it very interesting that you didn't go and try to get more competitive, or you didn't trade Clint Capella, who's been on the trade block and had been in rumors, but you got worse as a team, but you're trying to stay afloat because I don't necessarily think you can tank this year because you're not going to have your pick. So I'm just confused on what Atlanta is doing here. I don't quite get it. And obviously there's the whole Trae Young getting snubbed from the All-Star. That's not really related to this, but I just wanted to point that out as a fact, so I don't know. But yeah, fun fact, Trae Young got snubbed from the All-Star game again. But I don't see what Atlanta's doing here. And similarly with Brooklyn, Brooklyn was kind of the hot commodity of they was doing too good. They needed to trade their players. They traded DFS early to the Lakers. They end up trading Dennis Schroeder to the Warriors. Cam Johnson was the name who was supposed to be moved. I don't know if their asking price of 2 first-round picks was maybe too high and nobody was willing to give up 2 first-round picks. Although if I'm OKC, I would have called that phone because I got 17 of them things. But I'm just a little shocked because is Cam Johnson now going to be part of your rebuilding tenure? Or are you going to come back to him in the summer and try to trade him in the summer? Maybe I will say that the difference with Cam Johnson and Nikola Vucevic is in the summer you probably can get just as if not maybe more value out of Cam Johnson because he's still young, so I'm not too mad about that. But if you're fully going into rebuilding and trying to be a less competitive team to get a higher draft pick, I would have gotten rid of Cam Johnson. But unless it's kind of maybe similar to what the Toronto Raptors are doing, and we'll discuss that a little bit later, maybe you want to stay semi-competitive and then you just hit on one player in the draft and boom, you're competitive next year because the East is so thin. It's not that wild west. Those ultimately are my losers of this deadline. I will say the Mavericks, when healthy, their lineup is going to be nasty. We did see Anthony Davis play his first game, but he also gave him the full treatment, and he went down with a non-contact injury. It appears to be his oblique, so that's great if you're a Mavericks fan because you wanted someone who was going to be more consistent, and then you traded away for a guy to come in and instantly get injured game one. But that's just the Anthony Davis show for you. I will say when fully healthy, that lineup has the potential to be competitive, very competitive, and win now for this year. It's just I don't see them in the foreseeable future being a great team. I don't see that. Like this year, they're going to be competitive, but the next couple of years, I would have been more competitive with Luka Doncic on my roster than I would have been Anthony Davis. The Bulls, Hawks, and Nets just very confused on what they're trying to do with the roster. Bulls trying to go in for a playoff spot, play-in spot when your roster should be rebuilding. The Hawks then necessarily went to rebuild when you don't own your draft pick. It's just interesting. And then the Nets are a little bit in between. Then this was kind of the segment of I like what these teams did. I'm confused at what they're doing. I see the potential. It's bamboozling to me. The Brandon Ingram trade to the Toronto Raptors I really like on paper. I love that. I think he's going to excel in Toronto. I like the idea that he gets a new start. If you're Toronto, you should be re-signing him. You gave up two picks, 1 first, 1 second. You don't necessarily give up 2 picks if you're just going to have a rental of a guy. So I'd assume if you're Toronto, you're going to re-up his contract. But I will say the one confusing thing is, so you have a lot of wings on your roster now, and I don't know how you're going to run that. You have Brandon Ingram, who's a 3. You have RJ Barrett, who's a 3. And you have Scotty Barnes, who's a 3. Granted, Scotty Barnes can be a facilitator, and he is familiar with spacing the floor, so you're comfortable putting Scotty Barnes at that 4. Brandon Ingram's played the 2, as has RJ in the past, so are you going to run out a lineup of Emmanuel Quickley, RJ, Barrett, Brandon Ingram, simultaneously flipping off on the 2 and 3, however you want to do that, Scotty Barnes and then Jakob Poeltl? And that's similar to maybe what the Nets are trying to do, is they're not necessarily wanting to go into a full rebuild, stay semi-competitive. They're staying afloat in the East. They might get a high draft pick. They might be a sneaky play-in team. Go get someone in the draft, and then bam, next year you're a competitive team. If that's what Toronto's doing, I kind of like it. That spacing outside of Scotty Barnes is a little concerning to me, but I don't hate it. I just am confused of the timeline by it. But I mean, like I said, the East is not the wild, wild West. The only teams, the teams you're looking to surpass is the Boston Celtics, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the New York Knicks, and arguably the Milwaukee Bucks, back and forth, which we'll discuss them in a second. So if you can be a top 4 team in the East, then you're going to be a semi-competitive team. So I guess I don't hate it. The Kings, and we kind of discussed this with the De'Aaron Fox side of things. De'Aaron Fox always said he wanted to be out, and if I'm the Kings general manager, if I'm the Kings thinking, if you have a guy who wants to be out, I would have maybe traded him for more value. I understand that you got Zach LaVine back in it and you want him to stay competitive, but this is the wild, wild West we're talking about. If you couldn't win with De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis and even DeMar DeRozan, what makes you think that you can win with Zach LaVine, who is he's still good, but he's no De'Aaron Fox. He's worse than De'Aaron Fox. And I get it. I understand you got draft capital out of it, but you got 2 first-round picks. The third first-round pick is going to convey into 2 second-round picks, and you didn't get a young star out of it, so you got Zach LaVine and draft capital, which is okay. I'm not mad about it. If I'm trading De'Aaron Fox, I would have maybe went into, okay, let's trade De'Aaron Fox, let's maybe move DeMar DeRozan, and let's build for the future. Let's build around Sabonis. Let's get us competitive players that can help us with this. Or not competitive, sorry, younger players that can help us win in the future. But like I said, it's the wild, wild West. There's so many strong teams in the West that is hard to be competitive, and if you make a move like that, then you fall down to be like the Pelicans and be the bottom of the conference. Or if you do make a move that doesn't work out, then you're kind of like the Suns or the Warriors, and you're like just existing. So can't hate it. I just wish the Kings would have done something different. As for the Bucks, I kind of figured this trade was going to happen. There was a whole speculation that Middleton was going to get moved, and the big speculation that it was going to be for Kuzma. I was really hoping that maybe they could swing a deal with the Hawks and get a DeAndre Hunter, or maybe even swing a deal with the Nets and bring in a Cam Johnson. I would have loved to see that alongside Giannis and Dame Dollar, but I don't know the spacing, how Kyle Kuzma is going to fit around this, because Giannis obviously isn't a shooter. He can shoot, but he's not a type of shooter. Kyle Kuzma's efficiency is trash. There's just no ifs, whats, or buts about it. It is trash, and maybe that's because he was playing in Washington and he was just hucking up whatever he could left and right. Maybe he's going to get more efficient now that he's on a playoff caliber team and he's in Milwaukee, but he's rather inconsistent, and we kind of saw this with his first game. He came off the bench, he played 24 minutes, he had, I believe, 12 points. All of those in the first half, though, he was 4-13 from the field. He was a negative 15 in the plus minus. That's what I think we're going to continuously get from Kyle Kuzma. He's going to be the guy that if he makes the bucket, fuck yeah, let's go Kyle Kuzma, but we're also going to be like, the fuck are you doing, Kuzma? Like, I don't know. I don't like it for the Bucks. I don't think it makes them more competitive. I understand they get slightly younger in the wing position, but I don't think it benefits them more to whereas Middleton, I understand he's had injury concerns this year, but he was more consistent, and I think he could have been more consistent, especially in the playoffs because of his experience for you. So those are kind of my winners, my losers, and my kind of rather confusing trades of the NBA deadline. It has been absolutely, like I said, badonkers of a trade deadline, arguably the greatest in all of sports. We've already seen a couple of these players play with their new teams. I'm excited to see how that goes. Luka is supposed to make his debut against my Jazz, so he'll probably come back and drop a triple-double, and he plays my Jazz back-to-back, so he's probably going to back-to-back drop triple-doubles. So if you guys don't hear from me, that's probably why. I'll be under a rock. I'll come back eventually. Just kidding. But the trade deadline was absolutely crazy. I'm still bamboozled by half the trades that happened. I'm excited to see the Steph Curry new era with Jimmy Butler. I'm excited to see what Brandon Ingram can do in the future. Luka in LA is entertaining. Anthony Davis in Dallas is very entertaining. De'Aaron Fox in San Antonio is going to be fun to watch. I guess the next thing in basketball world is the All-Star break. We saw Team Kenny go for a younger team. We saw Team Shaq get kind of all the veterans. And then we saw Team Chuck get kind of all the international players. I'm actually excited to see. I'm glad we've got a change to the NBA All-Star game because it was just not competitive. It was everybody hucking up shots from half court, left, right, back, forth, at whatever it was. So I don't think it's still going to be that much competitive, obviously because of you don't want to risk an injury. But I am excited to see the new format in it. We'll discuss that in next week's episode. But that's the NBA trade deadline for you guys. Very interesting things happening in the NBA. I am, like I said, very bamboozled by everything, but very excited to see what is going to happen in this league as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Super Bowl recap. I don't think maybe some Philly fans, but I don't think a lot of us expected the type of Super Bowl that happened. We saw the Philadelphia Eagles take down the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl LIX, and they did it pretty handily. They took down Patrick Mahomes, arguably played the worst game he's ever played. At one point, he was down, I want to say, by like 33 points, and that was the largest deficit Patrick Mahomes has ever had in his entire career. He's had obviously in the past couple of Super Bowls, he was trailing by 10 against the Niners, came back and won that Super Bowl. And then against the Eagles, they were trailing by 10 at that half 2 years ago, and they came back and won that Super Bowl. And a couple years back, they were trailing the Houston Texans back when I believe Deshaun Watson was on that team. In the divisional, I believe it was 24-0, and then the Chiefs came back and won that game. But they wasn't able to overcome, obviously, a 30-point deficit in this case. And the Eagles showed why they were the better team. The final score was 40-22, in case you guys missed it. The Eagles almost did whatever they want, except for run the ball, shockingly. Barkley was efficient. Don't get me wrong. He definitely impacted the game. But the Chiefs' defense actually was really good at stopping the run. Barkley had not had an amazing game like he has this postseason. It obviously was not no repeat of the game he had against the Commanders type shit, where he was productive enough, but he wasn't necessarily a threat running the ball. The Chiefs defense actually did a really good job on stopping the run, but I will say Saquon Barkley was very much more involved in the passing game, which I knew Saquon could do, but I didn't know he was going to be as effective as he was. He caught, I want to say, 4 or 5 passes for a good amount of yards, and he was able to be productive in both. I'm not going to say productive, I guess, in the run game, but he was able to be what you expect out of a running back in your run game, and then he was able to be better in the passing game, which allowed the Eagles to open up their playbook, because the Eagles' offensive line has been so good this year that all you really needed is Saquon Barkley to run over everybody. He did it against the Rams twice. He did it against the Commies. Saquon has been that guy. And then that was one thing I told myself going into this game was I don't for instance, if you're a betting man, the line for Saquon Barkley was 114.5 rushing yards. And I said there's no shot, absolutely no way he hits that number. The Chiefs defense is not always, but they can defend the run pretty well. Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator over there, is pretty good at defending the run. He's always been someone who knows how to stop the run, but he's not going to be the greatest in the pass defense. This year he was rather good in the pass defense with his team, but when it mattered most, he kind of forgot how to do it. But that's not all necessarily Steve Spagnuolo's fault. That's more on Kellen Moore for putting up such a great offensive scheme to go against what he had dialed up. If we compare Steve Spagnuolo's defense and what he was dialing up to the MVP Josh Allen to this, like, it was just a night and day difference. I mean, as we even saw in the last play in the championship game between the Bills and the Chiefs, Josh Allen couldn't pick up the blitz. He didn't know what was coming. He had a corner blitz that he was not able to identify, and it cost him the game, essentially. There was a couple times the Chiefs got home. I believe 2 of the times they got home, it was negated for a flag. And other than that, Spags was only able to stop the run. He wasn't pressuring Hurts much outside of the one interception that Hurts threw. He pressured him on that one. But outside of that, Jalen Hurts played a perfect game. There was, it's just shocking. I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked at the same time. I'm shocked that the Chiefs played so bad, but I'm not shocked that the Eagles' offense was so much better. Or honestly, quite frankly, the Eagles' defense outplayed the Chiefs' defense too. The Eagles' defense consists of Jalen Carter, consists of Zach Bond, consists of C.J. Gardner-Johnson, consists of Cooper DeJean, who had a pick 6, and on his birthday too in the Super Bowl. Like that's fascinating. He's gonna go down, well, I mean, in his own history book, he's gonna go down in history as that, and he can say on his birthday he picked off arguably one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And not only did he pick him off, he took him to the end zone. So really good for Cooper DeJean. Happy for him on that, especially as a rookie to make that kind of play in a Super Bowl. But I'm still shocked with just how uncompetitive the game was on the Chiefs' standpoint of things. The Chiefs had been arguably the team to beat and everything. I mean, their record is 15-2. Had beaten the Bills, had beaten the Texans. Like Patrick Mahomes has been that guy. Travis Kelce has been that guy in the playoffs. And coming into this game, outside of the year when they played the Niners and they had Tyreek Hill, they had a decent receiving core coming into this game. You have a Travis Kelce, you have a DeAndre Hopkins, you have Hollywood Brown who's coming back, you have Xavier Worthy, who Xavier Worthy did pop off, but he also kind of got some petty receptions. And I guess no reception is ever petty necessarily because it is the NFL at the end of the day, but he got essentially 2 deep ball touchdowns late in the game. That cool for the Chiefs because they scored some points, but it wasn't like the Eagles had already locked up the game almost at that point. Eagles had locked up the game practically at halftime. It was very interesting, especially considering the way the game started. The Eagles' first drive, there was the pass interference call on A.J. Brown for offensive PI, and I went absolutely badonkers. I said, there's no freaking way that's pass interference. You gotta be kidding me. I will say, if anything, it should have been hands to the face. So maybe I'll give the Chiefs the benefit of the doubt there that they maybe shouldn't have, or they should have got the call regardless. But quite frankly, there's physicality like that every single play. Just like there's holding every single play. It's just a matter of, is it blatant? Is it obvious? Is it affecting it? Or is it it's the Super Bowl, let him play? It's kind of what I was saying. And then we kind of saw it in the next drive. I personally think the refs 100% gave him a makeup call the following drive because there was a defensive hold or something, and it was very weak too. Like it was just a football play that honestly could have went in favor of the Chiefs, and it didn't. It went in favor of the Eagles. But I think that was a makeup call because the pass interference called on A.J. Brown shouldn't have been pass interference. That happens every time. I get it. He kind of pushed off with his hand, but the DB's going for the ball, and he's going to, like, he didn't necessarily, like, push him off, fall him to the ground. He was going for the ball, trying to reach out. DB happened to put his face in that position, in my opinion, and, you know, that's how that happened. And with the way the game started, I said, oh, my goodness, please do not let the refs affect this game to either favor the Chiefs like we've seen all year or affect the biggest game on television of the year. Like, don't get me wrong, I understand that I'm all here for good officiating, but it is absolutely traumatizing when refs decide the game, and we've seen it before. I'm a Saints fan, if you guys don't know, and I've had to go through the 2019, I believe, game against the Rams when there was the blatant, most obvious pass interference on Nicole Roby, and they didn't call it. He hit him before the ball was even there, and like if we take that back to this Super Bowl, they hit Goddard after the ball passed him, which the ball was almost uncatchable. So I'm like, it's funny how they call that. But, and I understand it's 5 years ago, but you don't call the most blatant, obvious defensive pass interference. But the one thing I do say, as a Saints fan specifically, and as an NFL fan as a whole, is we still had opportunity afterwards. We could have milked the clock by running a couple plays, and Sean Payton was aggressive and passed it, and then we had to settle for a field goal. The Rams came down, tied a field goal. We went into overtime. We had the ball first. Drew Brees threw a pick because he got pressured. So that's the one caveat I kind of have, is we shot ourselves in the toe as well. We could have managed the clock better. We had some Matt Eberflus type shit with clock management there. But same time, obvious pass interference. And I was very upset with the officiating in the first quarter specifically, thinking this game is about to be out of hand. There's going to be flags thrown left and right. But outside of the first quarter, there was rarely any flags, unless the Eagles were trying to kick a field goal. They false started every single time. Shocking how they did that. But great on Jake Elliott as well for being able to... He technically made 6 field goals because we thought they iced him. At least I thought they was trying to ice him, which I thought was a little confusing except for a couple of them. And he drilled the ones that didn't count because of the false start. And then 5 yards back, he made the next one. And he struggled from 50 yards out this year. I think he was 1 of 8 this year, where he was 7 of 8 last year. But he when the lights were shining the brightest, he performed. I mean, he didn't really need to, because 9 points of this game wouldn't have really made it too far of a swing, 31-22. But you still can put a lot of faith in your kicker when you know your kicker is going to be consistent and going to do those points for you. So good on Jake Elliott for kind of having a comeback Super Bowl, especially from this past postseason he's had, and then this past year he's had. I bet he is rather excited to end on a good note for the year. But this game was just absolutely bamboozling, I guess is the best way to put it, because as an Eagles rooter, I was very happy the Eagles came out and established the fundamentals and the game. And it was funny, I was talking with somebody as I was watching the game, we're like, wouldn't it be great? And we just said this jokingly, like we didn't really think it was going to happen, but we're like, wouldn't it just be great if we had a blowout Super Bowl just because it's the Chiefs? We're like 39-3. Wouldn't it just be so great if the Eagles came out and blew out the Chiefs? And damn near we had that happen. I'm like, you almost called it spot on. Like I said, the Chiefs got their petty touchdown in the fourth quarter. You can argue 2 of them in the fourth quarter, but that's practically what the score was if you take away those 2 scores, 40-6. Like, it's just crazy. And I think it goes to show, going on to the Chiefs season, and I talked a little bit about this on my TikTok, where I have just my initial thoughts and reactions to the game after it happens, or any news after it happened, is the Chiefs have gotten so many calls to go their way this year. And on top of that, they've always been on the plus side of 1-score games, which you can go and say that's the fundamentals. That's the Chiefs knowing how to play winning football. That's the Chiefs knowing in crunch time what to do. But the way I look at it is, no, they just had the refs on their side. There's some games they fair and square did deserve to win. The Broncos game, where they blocked the field goal, they deserved to win that game. The refs can't really help you out on that one. You got through, you blocked the field goal, I'll give you that one. The game against the Ravens, Isaiah Likely, his toe was on the line. You won the game on that. You pressured Lamar. I'm not going to say you pressured him enough, because he actually had a lot of time in the pocket to make a play, but your defense came up when they needed to. I'll give you that, because you outplayed the other team in that game. But if you look at the game against the Bengals, there was the pass interference that was not pass interference. And then you have the game against the Falcons there, where there was no defensive pass interference when it was obvious that there was defensive pass interference. You had the game against the Raiders, where Any other time, it's a false start, it's a 5-yard penalty, and it's back to the Raiders for a chance to win a game-winning field goal. But they let the play go out. It turns out to be a fumble, and then you give the ball to the Chiefs. You just had so much magic, per se, luck, if we're being honest, though, going your way, that your luck is eventually going to run out. There's only so much you can do in that sense. And if we're being honest, outside of the Bills, because they played the Ravens in week 1, outside of the Bills, the Eagles were the most complete and efficient team that the Chiefs had seen this year and had obviously played this year, to whereas they haven't had that type of competition. And when they have had that type of competition, it's games they should have won. For instance, against the Raiders, that's a game they should have won. The game should have never been in a position where it came up to the last play of the game. Or the game against the Panthers, when the Panthers at the time were winless or maybe had one win, and they gave the Chiefs a run for their money. Like, those are situations where you are the better team and the games should not be in that position. And it showed when against 2 of the 5 worst teams, because the Raiders ended up with, I believe they have pick number 2, and the Panthers have, I think they ended the season a little bit better. I think they have a pick 6, 7, 8, something like that. But when you perform that poorly against a team that you're supposed to beat rather fair and square, and then you have that type of performance, as a viewer of the NFL, it just shows me that they're not as competitive. They're still a good team, don't get me wrong, but they're not as competitive as a team as you expect them to be, I guess, is what I'm trying to say here. Like, if you look at the Ravens had a tough year this year too. They played the Chargers, which they end up winning that game, but you played the Steelers a couple times. You played the Raiders, you lost to the Raiders. Like, they had some games where they shouldn't have lost, but after starting 0-2, they turned their season around. Granted, there's arguments that can be made of the Ravens are just a good regular season team. They choke in the playoffs. That can be said, but you also played the MVP Josh Allen in the divisional, not the championship series, the divisional. Kind of sucked that we had to see that in the divisional. And Lamar played an okay game, but he also had some turnovers. And then obviously Mark Andrews not catching the ball at the end. Yeah, that sucks for them. But the Ravens had decent competition all throughout the year. Same with like the Bengals. If you look at the Bengals scored 30 or more points, I want to say like 5-6 times this year, and their record in doing that was like 1-5 or 2-4, something like that. Their defense honestly was just preventing them from being an efficient team to get them to the postseason, because the Chiefs or the Bengals are also one of the most underdog type teams that can give the Chiefs, the Bills, the Ravens a run for their money, because they have such a talented offensive core. Joe Burrow, Chase Brown has been good on the ground this year. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, a really good wide receiver core there. But going back to it, the Chiefs just haven't really had that type of competition. Yes, they played the Bengals early this year, but the call went in their favor. Like, there's only so much you can do in that game. And then the Eagles, they started off rather slow too. I believe they lost 2 games in their first 3-4 matchups, and Nick Sirianni was on the hot seat. It was very crazy. He then went and shaved his head and also yelled at a couple Philadelphia fans too. But I guess if you're Philly, that's your love language. And they, from there, went on a tear. I think only losing 1 more game since that day, maybe 2. And they won each game with authority. I know one of the games they lost to was the Commanders, because Jaden Daniels went down and had a game-winning drive. But when it mattered most in the playoffs, the Eagles dropped 55 of them things on the Commanders. The Eagles, in my opinion, played damn near a perfect game. You can say the only thing that led it from imperfection was the Jalen Hurts interception, and I can agree with that. But you do also have to give the defense credit when it's due. That was the one blitz Steve Spagnuolo did dial up that got pressure on Jalen Hurts, and he kind of just threw it up, severely underthrew his man, but he was pressured. Outside of that, Jalen Hurts should have silenced any doubters out there. He played, and what's crazy too is, if we look at Jalen Hurts' stat line in the Super Bowl when he played against the Chiefs the last time 2 years ago, he had 374 yards, 4 total touchdowns, and there was like, oh, Jalen Hurts wasn't doing enough. Jalen Hurts was the problem. Jalen Hurts, blah, blah, blah. He has only done as much as he can as a quarterback and what you're expecting for a Super Bowl contending team. Like he's done everything you want out of a quarterback, and you still proceed, well, not you, but like whoever it is still proceeds to say, oh, he hasn't done enough or he's not doing enough. He performed significantly well in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, and it was honestly his defense that let him down, because it was James Bradbury who had the holding, and then Darius Slay, he, as great of a corner as he is, he couldn't follow a quick motion, and then MVS was able to score. Or Juju, where it was one of those two. But you can't necessarily blame Jalen Hurts for the defense. You can blame him for the offensive struggles, you can blame him for the interception, absolutely, but you can't blame him for the defense. And going into defense, the Eagles' defense this game was just absolutely flying to the ball. They had everything on lock. Outside of Xavier Worthy, everything was on lock. Travis Kelce was almost non-existent in that game. He had 3 targets, in the first quarter, no receptions, and like a drop, maybe 2 drops. And he finally got some yards in the third and fourth, but he wasn't the Travis Kelce that we expected him to be. Him and Mahomes were not on the same page where they have that Mahomes to Kelce connection. And I just was bamboozled by that. Then D-Hop dropped a wide open pass that would have gave them a first down, which was kind of huge. Maybe momentum swings in that way. I was very shocked by that, because D-Hop, I understand he's gotten older, but he's also been one of the league's premier's best receivers hands-wise. He's really good at catching any ball that comes in. So that's what he's been known for. That's what he was in Houston when he was with Deshaun Watson. That's what he was in Arizona, but Kyler Murray just couldn't get him the ball enough. And then obviously he knew he was going to have to take a back seat here in Kansas City. But again, when the lights were shining the most, he kind of didn't know what to do, and as did the rest of the Chiefs. Like, Patrick Mahomes had 23 total passing yards in the first half, and you have to credit the Eagles defense. The Eagles defense finished with, I believe it was 6 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 2 interceptions. Like, they played a phenomenal game plan. Hats off to Vic Fangio, who, by the way, coming into this game was winless against the Chiefs. I believe he was 0-8, 0-9, something like that. He had never beaten the Chiefs. He obviously seen them a lot of times, but he had never beaten them. And he finally, maybe he pulled a Tom Brady type shit, where for 2 weeks straight, he studied the Eagles, or the Chiefs playbook, the Chiefs offense specifically, and knew when Patrick Mahomes was going to drop back, what Patrick Mahomes was going to do. Because it's similarly to when Tom Brady won the Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers back in 20, that Tom Brady came out and said he studied the playbook, obviously, all year, and studied every team. But the 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, he said he studied inside and out the Chiefs defensive playbook. He said he knew the Chiefs defensive playbook better than the Chiefs probably knew their own defensive playbook, where if Tom Brady is dropping back, anybody makes a slight movement, you go to the left, you go to the right. Matthews down as a low safety, whatever he is, he's up high. Like, he knew the coverage, he knew what the blitzes were going to be, and he was able to pick apart that defense. That was the other time that we have seen Mahomes play one of his worst games. I believe the score to that game was like 32-9 or something like that in that Super Bowl, and that's one where we saw Mahomes not be able to move the ball. We saw Tom Brady and the Buccaneers basically do almost anything they wanted to do. Similarly to this, the Eagles, outside of their first possession, because they got the offensive pass interference call, wasn't able to do anything, but their defense stood tall, and then they just came out guns blazing. It's exactly, honestly, what I was expecting from the Eagles team. You have such a complete roster with Jalen Hurts at your quarterback, Saquon Barkley, who, by the way, is going to have a ring, and it was his birthday, so that was pretty cool. Saquon Barkley, who has a ring now. You have a really good wide receiver core in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. You have Dallas Goedert as a tight end. Your offensive line is arguably the greatest in the league. The only other ones I would maybe say up there is the Bills and the Lions. I'll give the Lions credit too. And then your defense, you have Big Play Slay, you got Cooper DeJean, you got C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and then you got Nolan Smith. You got Jalen Carter, who they obviously impacted the game, but it was more of their backups who was coming in. And Williams got in there a couple times. Zach Bond was able to do a lot. Like, it just wasn't. The Eagles swarmed the ball. They just did everything that was necessary. They played a fundamental, sound football game. And like I said, damn near a perfect game. I would say it's perfect because I understand Jalen Hurts threw an interception, but he was rushed. It wasn't like he threw it straight. Well, he was pressured. If he wasn't pressured and threw that and then missed his guy and gets a pick, that's where you can be like, okay, Jalen, why'd you throw that ball or bad ball on Jalen? But when you're getting Nick Bolton right in your face, you kind of just have to heave that up there, and it didn't go in his favor. But outside of that, Jalen Hurts did everything he was supposed to do. As for entertainment-wise, the Super Bowl, as someone who was rooting against the Chiefs because I didn't want to see them three-peat, it was entertaining to see. It's like the Los Angeles Dodgers and like the New England Patriots in the Tom Brady era and like the New York Yankees and like the Los Angeles Lakers. When they are such good teams and are having that winning culture, you could even say Cleveland and Golden State, when they had their run. But when they're so good for so long, you want to see somebody else kind of have that success. Obviously, we've already seen the Chiefs in back-to-back Super Bowls, back-to-back Super Bowls now, but we've seen them win back-to-back Super Bowls. We've seen Patrick Mahomes, ever since he's been a starter in the league, at least make it to the AFC Championship game, if not the Super Bowl. So it was kind of one of those scenarios where you get sick and tired of seeing Patrick Mahomes in there. Yes, you would have liked a more competitive game out of Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, but when they have been the team they have been and built the dynasty that they have and they win so much, it is, as an NFL viewer, so satisfying to watch that team. And I don't mean to say this in a bad way, but watch that team crumble. Watch that team not live up to the hype, the standards, because you also, like I said, know that they haven't played their best football. And a lot of analysts have said this too. Like I said, English is second language. But a lot of them have said this is the worst Chiefs team we've seen, but yet they find a way to win a game, which that was a scary thing. If you compare all the Super Bowl teams that the Chiefs had, talent-wise, they may have a little bit more talent this year, but this was the worst we've seen them perform, and they were still winning games. So they were still finding ways to win games, and that was the one caveat you could have on the Chiefs is, okay, yeah, you're right, their roster's not been as great as last year's Super Bowl run, as 2 years ago Super Bowl run, but they're still finding a way to get it done. And I guess the luck just ran out, because when you face a team that's as complete as the Eagles, you're gonna get exposed, and that's exactly what happened. Going into next season though, I will say Patrick Mahomes, while his legacy does still have 3 Super Bowl champions rings and being able to be in the Super Bowl, I think this loss is going to hurt, just similarly to like the one against Tom Brady, is because you're going to now have a bigger chip on your shoulder. He's already a great NFL quarterback, arguably one of the greatest. He still has a ways to go now, especially to get to Tom, but he's also going to be very upset with himself, and I think he's going to come out with a very big chip on his shoulder next year to prove a lot of people saying that he still can be that guy. Like, he's always been there, but he played his worst game ever. I think next year Patrick Mahomes is about to go in demon mode and have a spectacular season and probably lead the Chiefs to the Super Bowl again. But I think this is kind of exposed Patrick Mahomes in who he is as a quarterback, but I think Patrick Mahomes is only going to get greater as a quarterback from this performance. Jalen Hurts, like I said before, he should have silenced all the doubters. He simply has just put all the hate behind him, and he's gone out and he's performed and he's overcame every objection he's had. He lost to Eagles 2 years ago. He said, okay, I'm not going to let that happen again. Similarly, just like in college, with the whole Tua getting his starting position, transferred to Oklahoma, was a Heisman finalist. Like, all this guy does is he wants to ball, and he's really good at it. Saquon Barkley has our ring, and that's a great storyline too. Saquon spends 6 years with the Giants. The Giants decide, like I said, to pay their O-line, to pay Daniel Jones, who is no longer on your team. And then Saquon, who, by the way, is only, and I say only, getting $13 million, comes out and shows why he's still one of the most premier running backs of the game. and now he has a Super Bowl ring, and the Eagles should be favorites to be competitive and possibly build that dynasty. They're going to have Saquon back. They're going to have Jalen Hurts back. They have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith coming back. The big question is what do you do with Zach Bond, because he was on a one-year deal. Ideally, you would want to bring him back, but are you going to be able to afford to bring him back? It's going to be interesting to see what they can do there. But this Super Bowl was something for sure. I'm happy the Chiefs lost. It just, as a fan, I was wanting something more entertaining, but I cannot be mad at the performance that the Eagles gave, because honestly, from the second quarter on, we knew. I almost started hate rooting for the Chiefs just because I wanted them to make it a competitive game. I wanted to see the intensity. At the same time, so fulfilling to watch a team not be able to, as successful as a team as they have been, not be able to do the three-peat. And then I will say this last thing before I get out of here is I am so happy we do not have to listen to the three-peat nonsense that was about to happen if the Chiefs had won. Listen to my TikTok being filled with three-peat this, three-peat that, three-peat yo, three-peat ya. And then the whole, the three-peat madness would have been absolutely insane and probably taken over the internet for a solid month. So I'm happy that we do not have to deal with that as an NFL fan. But next year's Super Bowl, I'm calling it now. New Orleans Saints, they're going to win it. Don't ask me how. I just know they are. Boy, oh boy, what a Super Bowl and what a NBA trade deadline. Two of the most unlikeliest things we probably would have saw coming, and definitely something I did not have on my bingo card. The NBA trade deadline being as extravagant as it was, and then the Eagles blowing out the Chiefs. Not something you would have guessed would have happened, especially if you would ask me a month, 2 months ago. I would have said the NBA trade deadline was not going to be much. We wouldn't have saw big names move, maybe Jimmy Butler, and then I would have expected the Chiefs to three-peat. But the world of sports is rather crazy. Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode, Hands Down the Podcast. In next week's episode, we will go over a little bit more of NFL honors. We saw Josh Allen come home with the MVP, Kevin O'Connell come home with Coach of the Year, Saquon Offensive Player of the Year. Then we saw Jared Verse and Jaden Daniels win Offensive and Defensive Rookie of the Year, as well as Joe Burrow get Comeback Player of the Year. I will be discussing a little bit more of that in depth. And then if there's been any NFL free agency moves, coaching signings, I know the Saints are linked to Kellen Moore right now. He was kind of waiting for the game to go over. Maybe discuss Ben Johnson, Pete Carroll in their new coaching positions. And then in future episodes, look forward to baseball as spring training begins in about a month or so. So baseball content will be around the corner as well. But thank you guys so much for tuning in to Hands Down the Podcast episode 2, and I will catch you guys next week for episode 3.